Joining me today is Kevin Kelly, CEO of Emerald Packaging, a company that develops flexible packaging solutions for the fresh produce industry and has been closely involved in California's evolving packaging regulations. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me and being here on the Waste World podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good.
No complaints.
No complaints, but maybe we'll see about how this conversation goes. I've been complaining about technical issues, but we're here, we're happy, we're having fun. But I'd like to start off, Kevin, with people who might not be familiar with yourself or Emerald Packaging. Can you just tell me a little bit about your company and what your role is there?
Sure. I'm the CEO of Emerald Packaging. We're a family-owned business, so I'm a family member. And I had two siblings in it. They're retired, and so I'm the last. We have about 250 employees. We're about $100 million in sales, almost exclusively to the produce industry. So you nailed that in the introduction. So you go to the store, salad in a bag, that's us. Baby carrots in a bag, us. Sometimes potatoes in bags and stuff like that. So that's our playing field in a grocery store. We don't do anything else except licorice because they're around the corner from us. But and they give really good gifts. So
Sure.
otherwise, we're basically a produce packaging company. Been involved in California political issues for 30 years, going back, I'm one of the last people who can remember AB 2049, which was the grocery carryout sack take back bill. And I think that was probably in 2002 or something like that. So I've got history, and sometimes that works to my advantage, sometimes to a distinct disadvantage.
I don't know. Bringing knowledge to the table seems like an advantage every time, but I've people like to bend their truths a little bit, but I'm sure you got it all covered, Kevin. The experience matters, right?
I try not to bend truth too far. Trust me.
Well, on the podcast we can do what we want. There are no rules here. All right. Well, let's kind of jump into that a little bit. So, the crux of our conversation is going to be around California SB 54. That represents, one of the biggest packaging EPR laws in the country. So, I'm curious from your perspective, what was that legislation intended to accomplish, and where have you seen the biggest disconnects between that vision and implementation?
Well, I think the legislation, frankly, was because it was written by Senator Allen out of Santa Monica. I think it was intended to be far more harsh, actually, than the regulations ended up to be. It's not to say that the regulations are easy by any stretch. They're not. They're the targets, for instance, hitting by 2028 the recycling rate that's required of plastic, which I think is like 28%. When less than 1% of it, flexibles, is recycled today, is clearly impossible, was impossible when the bill was written. So it was basically a backdoor ban if you took the recycling rate as, set in stone cement. Cal Recycle, I think, since it's having to deal with it in the real world, has taken more the point of view that, well, if we have progress, we're willing to look at exemptions because there's exemption language in the regulations. In certain cases, exclusions. For instance, half of the packaging I make is excluded from the regulations altogether. Now, that itself ends up becoming a thorny issue, which we can revisit later. But so I think Allen intended for a much harsher, measure than he ended up getting, and in fact, he's a little bit pissed off about the regulations. I'm not sure, if anybody had any doubts what Allen's intent was, then they really should see how pissed off he is now, because regulations are not going to be easy. They're going to be very expensive for companies. The amount of detail that's required by Cal Recycle and CAA, Circular Action Alliance, the PRO. I'm taking your listeners are familiar with the term.
Let's go on a trip.
Yeah. So I think, out the gate, Cal Recycle has shown some restraint that Allen didn't intend.
Hmm. Now, if we're looking at businesses that aren't actually producers and they're receiving these notices, threats of fines, can you speak to them and kind of walk us through what Emerald Packaging, what happened there, and why this is all causing so much confusion for them?
Oh man, I tell you.
I hate to be the dour bad dude, like
And
let's just
they
throw it
just took
down.
it's like, oh, that's right. I remember now. So,
Oh, damn.
so if you go back to the very beginning of Circular Action Alliance, they said to sign up, even if you weren't a producer or
Mhm.
didn't know whether you were a producer, just sign up so you get the information. Well, that turned out to be complete bullshit because
Mm.
what CAA did is they took those lists and said, oh, these people are all producers. And you're like, no, no, I was just here to get information. I don't know whether I'm a producer or not, or in fact, I'm not a producer. But you start getting delinquency notices almost immediately. And I learned that when Oregon came into effect because I got dinged with a delinquency notice straight away. And then I had the Department of Environmental Quality chasing me around from the state of Oregon. And we weren't a producer under the law. We weren't even close to being a producer. I think we only shipped 26 pounds of plastic into Oregon in 2024, even less since then. And
Mm.
so we didn't qualify. So back in the day, you like a year ago, I could write, or I think it was 9 months ago, I could write to CAA and say, "Hey guys, or I could get my attorney at $1,200 an hour to write to CA and say, hey guys, this guy is not a producer under the law. He only had 26 pounds. Here's his manifest, blah, blah, blah. CAA, within 5 days, which was their stated policy, would wrote me back and said, okay, you're not a producer. You're off the list. Don't
Mhm.
worry about it. 3 weeks ago, I get another delinquency notice from Oregon saying, "Hey, you're a producer. You didn't you file your papers." And I'm like, "No, we aren't a producer." So I sent back everything to CAA that they'd sent, including a copy of their email. And now you get a note back saying, "Our small staff is a bit overwhelmed at this time
Mm.
from the volume of questions." And California just came into effect. Um, Now they have their own California staff, so let's just put that aside. But we'll get back to you. It may be after the filing deadline for reports.
Mhm.
And so you're sitting there going, okay, well, I'm not going to have an answer. I may miss a filing deadline that I shouldn't be missing anyway because I shouldn't be filing. And it seems like I would take from that the internal, the data networks inside of CAA aren't really robust at this point.
Mm.
There must be multiple lists or whatever, and so that's a little bit concerning because if you can't handle Oregon, I don't know how the hell you're going to handle California. The next thing in California was uh, I was talking to customers, I was advising them to sign up, many of whom had no idea
Mhm.
that this regulation existed until just before the filing deadline, because it's only then that the trade associations really started getting the word out. CAA and Cal Recycle made no effort to outreach to anybody. They really left it to folks like me and to trade associations to get their members to join CAA by the sign up date, which also happened to be the reporting date. So folks were very confused by all that. I was advising them to sign up. Don't worry about filing your report. You'll get a chance to go back and do that. But for people who normally like want to obey the law, they sign up and they're like, oh shit, I'm going to be delinquent straight off the bat. That's obviously deeply concerning. But so they signed up, many of them, and then almost immediately they got hit with a delinquency notice from Oregon and Colorado.
Mm.
So what CAA was doing was taking anybody who signed up in California and immediately assuming you were a producer in Oregon and Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had folks who signed up at the last minute, barely knew what they were doing to begin with, suddenly getting hit with delinquency notices. And they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not a producer. Well, who do I reach out to? Reach out to producer risk support at whatever, circulactionalliance.com.org. And they do that and they get these notes back saying, hey, we're a bit overwhelmed at the moment. And so obviously I think you can take from this, and I would, that the organization, this was a startup, right? I mean, and startups, if you've ever run one, and I've run one, and it's a bitch. I mean, I took over my father's business. Building it was a hell of a lot different than starting one. And if I hadn't had someone come along and propose a joint venture, I would have completely failed at that startup. I just didn't have the chops for it. And you got a bunch of people running CAA who ran businesses, but they ran existing businesses. They didn't start them. Here's an organization that in 3 years has gone from 0 to 110 because it's not just taking on Oregon, which would be challenge enough. It's taking on 6 other states and more besides. And the organization just isn't built out in terms of databases and software tools and people, even though you're hiring people like mad, just because you hire people like mad doesn't make a department or an office or a team. So, all the indications we're getting is that the CAA's got great people. We've met them. I mean, they've been in my plant. I really liked all of them. Very smart people, very dedicated, very committed, but under extreme duress, I think, right now. Because, again, I go back, if you're having problems in Oregon, imagine California. And I really worry in the weeks and months ahead. I don't want EPR to fail because the pro is in way over its head. And I mean, if I were to start a pro today, I would go hire a bunch of guys in Silicon Valley, men and women in Silicon Valley, and put them in charge because it's really a reporting tool and a startup. And that's not, I think, the expertise of the people who are in charge right now. And so this thing could really be a mess over the next 6 months to a year.
Sure.
Especially if CAA can't get its act together and start responding to people quickly, start not cross-pollinate between states. In fact, we went to CalRecycle and said, hey, listen, they're taking signups from California and saying that means you're a producer in Oregon. And CalRecycle is like, huh, really?
Interesting.
And you're like, oh God, no, here's all the unintended consequences. Within 24 to 48 hours, like stuff is happening that wasn't anticipated.
Right.
And I'm not clear that it's even legal to take information from a sign up in one state and apply it to another state. So there's stuff already that's sending up red flags.
Right.
That for me, forget about meeting the rates and dates. Let's worry about the organization itself on top of that. So I start out worried.
So I gotcha. Do you think there's a lot of, I guess, I'm from the outside perspective. I'm just a guy that talks into a camera, writes a little article here and there, right? Do you think a lot of the confusion is created because the things do seem to change a lot, and this is like a Herculean effort for people to kind of take on, and it does become disjointed when you do jump into states like that? Do you think that just like, oh, we're drowning from day one because there's so much to kind of
Well,
keep up with.
the California plan was put out, I think, at the beginning of last week, and was immediately amended.
Mm,
And so you're which now? Okay, now which part are we commenting on? So yes, I think it when you have 200 pages of regulation and you have a startup trying to implement those 200 pages of very, dense reading, with, hooks to other California laws and regulations and definitions. I think, I just think it's a very complex. It's complex out the gate,
yeah.
and even just within California, it's changing quickly.
Hmm.
And then buried underneath that is that there are groups, trade associations, corporations who wrote letters about the regulations to CalRecycle. If CalRecycle replied to those letters, anything they said was legally binding. Well, we don't know what CalRecycle said in any of those letters. They're public documents. Good
Hmm.
luck trying to find them. But the folks that got those replies may have addendums to the regulations or interpretations of the regulations by CalRecycle that don't immediately seem apparent.
Hmm.
So unless CalRecycle has reported all those on to CAA, when they're making decisions about exclusions, although I think exclusions is chiefly the principle of CalRecycle, but even exemptions, you have just another layer of confusion that's likely to come over the next 3 to 4 months, and that's going to piss off Senator Allen even more, I'm sure, because I'm sure there's things in those comments that are going to make it easier, for instance, to apply for an exemption.
Hmm.
I don't know for a fact, but it's the kind of thing that can commonly happen. Uh, it's a little bit like reading Supreme Court,
There's
decision.
really dry papers out there. You just got
Yeah,
to sit there.
yeah, and they start answering questions that weren't asked.
Yeah.
So yeah.
When we you kind of brought up the California's community, and I want to look at those smaller businesses and how these reporting requirements are affecting them. How is that working differently than like the large companies that have more resources to dedicate to compliance? What are these small businesses doing? What are they expected to do?
Well, it's interesting what folks think of as a small business. We're at 100 million. We're one of the smallest flexible packaging companies left out there.
Hmm.
And so let's just talk about what the reporting requirements would look like for me.
Sure.
Or one of my customers is I have a customer that's a mid-sized farm, small, I guess, by carrot standards in the Central Valley. They're looking at page after page after page after page after page of things they have to report on. How many pallets used, how many pounds of shrink wrap, how many pounds of plastic. If you take the way it's written seriously, you'd have to break that plastic down into its elements. So 50% high density, 30% low density, 20%, ethyl vinyl acetate. Uh, uh, that would be insane. So I think for now they're just looking to collect the metadata, how many pounds of
Hmm.
plastic. But if they end up going down to that level, uh, it's going to be impossible for even the big organizations. But for the smaller guys who don't have staff to go back and look at 2023 data, which is the baseline in California, uh, to try and even if they just who knows even if they have the data, uh, uh, you're you're talking about enormous expense, probably having to go out and hire a law firm to figure out what they do and don't have to report. Uh, Probably buying software from some law firm, that helps with the reporting, and then having probably to hire a person to do the reporting, maybe a couple of people, because you're looking not just at reports for California, you're looking at Oregon, Colorado, how many other states. Uh, I don't actually. So then, if you get down to really small businesses, just imagine, you
Mm-hmm.
say you're a $5 million business, and which would have to report under 54. Uh, I don't know how it's going to be some guy staying up really late at night, when he would normally be having dinner or watching a movie or something
Mm-hmm.
with the family, trying to actually, put all this data together, because there's so many questions asked. And I think that's, again, one of the unintended consequences of the legislation, is that it's going to really end up driving, I think, consolidation, not
Mm-hmm.
just because of the fees, but because of the level of reporting required. And if it was just 54 alone, you could say, okay, maybe one person I just need to add. But if it's 7 states, 14 states, 20 states, you're going to have to add several people.
Yeah.
And most farmers, for instance, are operating on margins of 2-3%, so not that, and out of that has to come reinvestment and probably new taxes and all sorts of other things. So it's not like it's, safe money. Uh, I think that, well, like with a lot of these bills that require a lot of reporting and then threaten hefty fines and open up the possibility of private attorneys coming after you like they do in wage and hour cases, which farmers are very familiar with. I think it's just one more reason to get out. And
Mm-hmm.
so, we tend to lionize small business, but it's bullshit. Nobody really gives a fuck in Sacramento about small business. They don't care about the industrial working class anymore. That's all long gone. I'm like one of the last people who remembers, that Democratic Party. And it's dismaying when I hear a customer like Kernridge Farms tell me, "Hey, I am not passing this farm on to my kids.
Mm-hmm.
Just not doing it. It's not going to be viable." And that's a shame. Sometimes you hear that and you're like, "Ah, he's just complaining." And then sometimes you hear it and you're like,
Right. Right.
"This dude is serious.
Right.
He's had it." And I think that's where I think 54 is just one more thing for a lot of small businesses in California to have to grapple with.
Gotcha.
Um, that will drive consolidation. I'm not sure that jobs will be lost, but
Mm-hmm.
I think certainly the number of businesses will continue to shrink, because it's just going to be impossible for smaller businesses to do all the regulatory work. And
Yeah. Hey.
as most studies say, as a matter of fact, that if the state is going to come after a small business or a big business aggressively for the same violation, they're going to go after the small business.
Mm-hmm.
If the big business can afford the lawyers, the
Right.
small business can't afford the lawyers. So it's this whole BS about, oh, we're worried about small business. Do not give me that. I mean, regulators don't behave that way. When they're presented with a small business to take enforcement action against, they go.
Mm-hmm.
When they're presented with a big business, because they know they're going to meet a legal challenge back.
Yeah.
And yeah, my day's really screwed up now. So,
I'm so sorry.
yeah, oh my
you know,
God.
I was just thinking, I was like, let's really grind the gears on a Monday before a holiday and just kind of make sure that no one's having a good time today.
I'm gonna have a good drink this weekend.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I guess it just sounds, I mean, talking with other small businesses these kinds of things do make things sound kind of bleak on their end. And it sounds like it's always a fight, it's an uphill battle. And it's just like, all right, who wants to stay in the game? Who's trying to get out? Is there a point to staying in the game? Like, it must just be so dark out there sometimes, right?
Oh yeah, I mean we're a family business. There's a third generation that could come into it that's just not going to,
Yeah.
and they're not going to because they've seen how tough it is. I mean, they've seen how tough it is on multiple levels. They know the amount of work that goes into it, the difficulties with customers that everybody has, whether you're running your business or not. But if you're not, then you've got a little bit of distance from it. But they also now increasingly hear over the last 30 years about the regulatory
Mm-hmm.
issues, and I try to argue the opposite. I think even if there isn't plastic, there's going to be packaging of some sort. And there's real interesting technologies being developed out there, and we're playing with a lot of them on the compostable side, which, of course, the state of California is trying to make more difficult to use that term right now as well. But the compostable side, fiber, there's developments with paper, even for produce that are really interesting. And so I think this is a time where you could have a lot of creativity. Um, that doesn't inspire, my 32-year-old niece or my 30-year-old nephew who would be great in it to jump on board. It certainly doesn't interest my daughters. They're in their 20s, so they get a pass on that question right now.
They don't get excited about packaging?
And yeah, no, yeah, my middle daughter's a very good rock climber, so she's out in the
Okay.
Sierras somewhere right now on a
Nice.
wall, undoubtedly. So I
Not
guess
thinking about carrots or potatoes at all.
I'm
Like,
not
nope.
thinking of it, not worrying about what's SB54. Is that a route somewhere?
Right.
So
Oh
yeah.
man. All right, so we've touched a little, like a lot, I guess, on SB54, and I guess I'd like to hear from you, and if you've got the ideas for it. Are there any recommended changes you'd like to see with SB54 that could reduce burden on businesses, like we talked about, that's would still achieve the law's environmental goals, but maybe make it a little easier on everybody? Maybe so it's not like, oh God, I got another thing I got to face here.
Well, are you trying to solve for the end of life for every single product out there that you could possibly capture, or do you really want to focus on plastics?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it's the Plastic Pollution, Prevention Act. Uh, it's a lot more than that. And if I were to redo 54, I would go back and look at, you know, non-reusable, non-recyclable paper and plastic and leave it there. Forget it. Don't go beyond that. Don't start hauling pallets in. Don't haul this glass in. Don't. If there's a way to recycle it and it's recyclable, phew, go out and teach consumers on how to recycle it,
Mm-hmm.
because that's half the problem, is what do I actually put in my bin? What do I actually throw out? People throw out things they should be recycling and recycle things they should be throwing out. So there's not a lot of the consumer in California is not very educated on recycling, as I'm sure in spades. I get it.
Every state I've talked to, it seems like the consumer in every state has been like, yeah, we'll just throw it away. Who
Yeah,
knows? Whatever.
it's just you go to Europe and it's like people have 5 bins and they are worried,
Mm-hmm.
that my dog is going crazy in the background.
I can't hear it. You're fine.
Okay, great. They're worried that they're going to make a mistake throwing something in the wrong bin, for which you get fined
Mm-hmm.
in countries like Belgium. So human beings are capable, right? We just haven't put the time and effort to it here in the United States. So segue back to what we'd like to change. I think I would, and I got into a small argument with Senator Allen's uh, chief of staff about this, that the dates were unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
And her reply back was, well, you guys always say that. And I'm like, okay, I hate the American Chemistry Council. All right. I think the plastics industry has done a horrible job, engaging the whole issue around recycling. California plastics manufacturers, packaging manufacturers 30 years ago went to the American Chemistry Council with a proposal to begin the recycling of flexibles in the state of California. The ACC said absolutely not, and that was sort of the end of it. Back then, the ACC owned both the Democrats and the Republicans. Now they just sort of give to Republicans. Uh, so, it's not like industry has been entirely opposed to it. I think the West Coast guys um, were much more engaged with the issue because of the early work California was doing on waste studies and whatnot. But Senator Allen's chief couldn't have been more wrong. She's talking to someone who, in fact, believes that there should have been recycling and it should have been 30 years ago, and has been trying to work with compostables for the last 30 years, and finally just gave up and started giving away PCR. And, so I'm a different duck, but we're all just sort of written off as, and then, it because there's no dialogue when things like rates are set by CAA, in some cases they're too high, in some cases they're not high enough
Mm.
in order to encourage, say, the use of compostables, which you probably have to take the fee up another couple of bucks to actually hit there, or design a different kind of incentive or something, But I would go back and relook at the dates, and I would say, the first goal should be, the reduction of plastic, recycle if possible. And let's instead of having the first hurdle at 2028, when, let's face it, no money's been put into building a recycling system that could handle more plastic. That's, that's, I mean, that was, and that was just the stupidity of that date right out the door. There was going to be no funding coming from CAA to do anything that might require increase the recycling rates by 2028. So let's make the first hurdle 32, then 35, and then 40, and actually get serious about building a recycling system. I would also, it's nice, it's all great to say, oh, let's nail the producers. They're polluting the earth with this stuff. Yeah, I mean, producers are responsible for at least some of this. The grocers are responsible for some of it because they're always looking for convenience for themselves and for consumers. But consumers are responsible for it too. And the missing piece in 54 is the consumer,
Mm-hmm.
because everybody wants to pretend that the consumer isn't going to get hit with these costs anyway.
Yeah.
So instead of excluding the consumer entirely, why not divide up costs along the entire chain? Or the other way I would have done it is to simplify it and just go back and say, hey, resin companies, every pound of plastic you send into the state of California is going to require a surcharge from pound one from here on.
Mm.
The feds have done that with the Superfund cleanup. Everybody pays an extra penny for their resin in order to meet the Superfund requirements. You could have done that in California. It would have taken all the reporting out. It would have taken all small businesses off the hook. Everybody, it would have been so clean. The resin companies lobbied against it. They got the hearing. They have the money. They're the power, and they got through. They've skated right past any responsibility for any of this. And who controls the American Chemistry Council? The resin companies, the big petrochemical companies. Who's opposed recycling from day one? the ACC, the resin companies, and the petrochemical companies. You want to blame someone for the situation we're in today, it's those guys, all right? Those guys. And they are completely let off the hook by bullshit progressives who say, who want to point to producers and get self righteous. Well, let's look at where the money got people off the hook. All right, let's look who has the power here. And it's petrochemical companies. And let's look who doesn't, me. And even though I actually give to Democrats, and I'm sure nobody in the senior leadership of ExxonMobil does, but it, it, it's it just makes no sense. And so it could have been so much easier. And then you wouldn't need it. You wouldn't need feed-in dates. You could say 5 cents immediately, effective 2025, every pound of plastic coming into the state of California, either by rail or by truck, 5 cent upcharge. And that money is being designated to Cal Recycle. Cal Recycle can create an entity if they want to manage the money and build the recycling system, or it can hire staff and do it themselves, as long as the money doesn't end up going into the general fund or be used by any other Cal Recycle division.
Hmm.
It just would have been so simple. Maybe they thought they wouldn't, uh, leave themselves open to a lawsuit for interfering with the Commerce Clause. These laws are so open to lawsuit around the Commerce Clause, it doesn't matter. So you might as well have just gone for it
Right.
and made it simple. For some reason, when you get legislators involved and lawyers, and you're going to head towards the complex and towards let's piss off as few wealthy people as possible, and or corporations, and so you leave the petrochemical companies out. And I think that was a real mistake. And that all goes back to Senator Allen, not me. And Allen could talk, Allen could say, "Oh, you're just complaining because you're a producer." Well, I'm not a producer, which is stupid as well. But it it goes back to who he should have tackled to begin with. And
Hmm.
you would have to go ask Senator Allen why he didn't.
Are you thinking I should have him on this podcast as a
Yeah.
rebuttal?
Yeah. Well, you'd have to ask him why he didn't do it. There's got to be reasons the Democrats decided not to go after the petrochemical companies.
um, with some of those suggestions there, do you think that other states looking at this should be like, okay, these are the things that other states should be implementing now before they're in a similar situation?
I think so. I think if you could take a simplified version of 54,
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be it's listen, the people at Cal Recycle are great. The people at CAA are great. You've got great people. I think they're smart. They could actually figure out if they were allowed to sit down and design a recycling law, those folks could do it. They could do it, and they would make it real world, and it would still bug the crap out of everybody, but it would be, doable.
Right.
No pain, no gain. Okay.
Yep.
I mean, that's true. Uh, so I think it would be possible to sit down in a room and write up on a clean sheet of paper, probably, a very simple program focused on plastics and unrecyclable paper. And let's look at getting rid of that waste. Let's figure out how to reuse it, or, switch to reusables or something, you know. Uh, but I think it would be possible to do. And if I were a state like New York, I'd be saying, okay, well, why not? Why don't we go after the petrochemical companies? I mean, California and Oregon are already being called out under the Commerce Clause, so if they want to sue us, let them sue us because, they're going to sue us no matter what we do. So uh, let's go to the source and let's charge 5 cents more for all plastic, being shipped into the state. Distributors bringing in from overseas, would have to pay, obviously, but just a per pound fee,
Hmm.
a simple per pound fee, you know, um, that is based on a realistic cost. Now, realistic is a tough word because my
I
realistic.
think realistic's a fun word in the
Yeah,
industry. Yeah.
So let me back that one out. That a cost to build out a recycling infrastructure over 15 years.
Hmm.
You know, uh, and I think you these laws have inspired interesting developments. I think with both with PCR and with compostables, and you have the United States Flexible Film Initiative that the brands started to see if uh, uh, flexibles packaging could actually be reclaimed.
Hmm.
So they're subsidizing it. So there's interesting, stuff happening because of EPR that should have happened 30 years ago, but okay, that's where my history bogs me down. It's like, oh, it should have happened.
There's
Yeah,
experience getting in the way.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I do think it's easier. It's easy. It would be easy to create a much simpler approach and one that required a lot less reporting from small businesses
Hmm.
because the onus would be back on ExxonMobil, or much simpler, and what they were being asked to report was plastic only. And again, if you could put that back on the folks bringing it in from out of the state, the resin companies, firstly, and then distributors or out-of-state corporations who are shipping into the state, having to account for it, I think would be a much simpler approach than having a farmer down in Bakersfield who competes against two behemoth, baby carrot guys, Grimway and Bolthouse, having that guy having to go out and hire staff to be able to report for 99 things.
Hmm.
It just really makes no sense. And it is overly burdensome.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it's tough, and I think small business, they deal with a lot anyway, and then more stuff piles on, and they have to just grit their teeth sometimes. Like, all right, we got to figure this out because
Right.
it's not going
No,
to get any better.
and I think what has flummoxed a lot of them is it's like, okay, California. And sometimes I'm in those conversations. I'm like, yeah, California and Oregon and Colorado and yeah.
Scott, the West.
No, I'm blank. Yeah. And I have been in rooms where I actually get blamed for the fact that they don't know this, even though we've been talking about EPR to customers for 5, 6 years.
A while, right?
We've been trying to get them involved and going to Sacramento and talking to their legislators back in 2001,
Hmm.
2021, sorry, when the law was being written. And I was running around with the Western Growers Association in Sacramento representing the ag industry. And it's like, I'm the packaging guy, guys, automatically suspect walking into a room. Let me tell you, a farmer walking into a room is going to be much, have a lot more clout than me.
Sure.
And then the first round of regulations, hey, write letters. No, no, no one does it. The second round, no, the last round, everybody starts flying into, action about it. And I'm explaining to customers like, no, this is not a bill. Okay. These are the final regulations. All right. It's like, this isn't the 24th hour. This is like the 26th hour. And they're just these are big companies and they're just getting involved because, their attention is 30 different places. even a $1 billion farm probably only has 5 or 6 senior executives and very small staffs underneath them. Most of the folks are in the farming operation. Uh,
Mm.
uh, so I think business just didn't wake up. In some cases, didn't want to wake up, but a lot of cases didn't wake up. And now they're waking up, and it's a big shock. And you get folks from CAA in the room, and you say, guys, there's a lot of folks that don't know that they should be joining, and their take is, oh, they're just, that's not true. They're just saying that. And I'm like, we live in an echo chamber where EPR, we know what it means. We know what SB 54 is. We know that shorthand for law that's passed and whatnot and is, already in effect. Outside that echo chamber, not everybody has been picking up the reverberations. And I think that's been a great disservice. You pass laws and then don't tell people that you've passed them. And there are so many laws passed in Sacramento every year. Obviously, getting word out about all of them is impossible. We're counting on vets to make sure that people don't declaw their cats. For instance, we don't expect all cat owners to know this,
Hmm.
but I think in this case, uh, it would have made most packaging companies, frankly, don't address EPR with their customers because they don't have EPR specialists. We're one of the few. If you talk to most of our customers, they'll say they're the only supplier. Kevin's the only supplier who ever comes in and talks about EPR, talks about SB 54. For a long time, I think I was seen as a crank,
Mm.
because nobody else was talking about it. Well, nobody else is still talking about it in my industry to their customers. And I think that's what CAA was counting on, but you can't count on that. There needed to be much more grassroots um, advertising, getting the word out about these regulations, and it just didn't happen. And in a
Mm.
lot of cases, the Western Growers Association packaging wasn't even on their radar 5 years ago. It was water and labor, water and labor, water and labor. Now it's packaging, water and labor. And so, I mean, they're one of the few trade associations that's actually clued into the issue, but most have not. And most trade associations are still really out to lunch around it. And so I'm sure that there's thousands of businesses out there that should have signed up and did not sign up. And now if they hear about it, they're going to hear people saying, don't sign up, because if you sign up, you're going to be getting a delinquency notice from Oregon. And oh boy, try and get out of that one because nobody up there will reply to you. So it's all of that, I think, that has gotten us off to a really bumpy start.
Yeah.
And hopefully, we do have lessons. My worry is, you have the Republican attorney generals coming in and suing to block, the implementation. I don't want this to become a Democrat Republican issue because it's not,
Right.
right? We need EPR, we need recycling. If if the Republican attorney generals win, what are they going to win? They're going to get bans, because if you can't have EPR, well, that means really you can only have bans.
Mm.
So that'll get litigated, then too. But uh, I I I don't think that lawsuit is helpful in the least. I think it really sets up, a binary conversation that should just be a lot. It should be inclusive of everybody. And so I wish they had just stayed out of the state of California. They didn't ask anybody in the state of California whether we wanted them to sue the state or not. There's no co-plaintiffs from the state of California. There's,
Hmm.
there's a national association of wholesalers, but they're a national organization, and they're very close to the Republican AGs. So it's I'm worried that the conversation that will need to happen, and I think most legislators understand is going to need to happen 2, 3, 4 years out, is now going to get muddled by
Yeah.
this, Republican versus Democrat thing, which seriously unhelpful.
Unhelpful. And this is what we talk about on the show a lot, is that this kind of stuff takes everybody, and it should be these bipartisan issues. Like, we're all on the same side of like making
Right.
things better. Why does it come down to this political aspect of it? Can we all just
Right.
like work together on that one?
Yeah.
Um, to that effect, in your opinion, this is my last question for you. Looking ahead, what does success look like here? Like, how do we get the industry regulators and producer responsibility organizations together to create a system that's good on both sides?
We have the laws that are there now, functioning now, and I think um, you got to give them a year or two,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody has to get some experience of it, and then I think come back to the table. I think that you're going to have someone like Allen um, willing to come back to the table and have a conversation about what's working and what's not working. Um, I, I think there's probably 10% of the folks or 20% of the folks 10% who probably think nothing should be done. And there's 10% who think it should be entirely scrapped. And in between is, what you suggested, those of us who want to see a system that's workable. But let's see what doesn't work about the current system. And I think what's not going to work is the complexity of it, the burden of it, and the fact that we're asking a startup organization to oversee it. And I think if we come back and say, okay, let's put a system together then that works, let's see how we can go about doing this in a way that lays a national groundwork, which would be much more, let's say, going after the petrochemical companies for, the fee, they'll end up passing it on to their customers and so on and so forth, but it's an easy collection point. So let's see how we can wrap them in and then, pick up the other outliers. Uh, I think a simpler system is going to be in everybody's interest, and I think everybody will buy off on that. Probably even Senator Allen, who won't be, he wants to be insurance commissioner now. One thankless job to another thankless job. But you'll, I think folks will bend back towards simplicity. What would be really great is you get a administration and a Congress that also wants to tackle these issues, and you end up with a federal law, that aims to put together recycling for the entire United States and build actual recycling systems that wraps everybody into the game. And you have one law. You don't have a patchwork of laws. I don't know what Republican states think, you know, they benefit from not dealing with recycling questions. They have the same problems as the state of California does around
Mm-hmm.
litter and waste and whatnot. So I would think that at some point there's going to be a bipartisan shift. And if there isn't, hopefully, a more national movement, including companies that are tired of dealing with a patchwork of regulation. And I could see that happening because eventually, let's say the Supreme Court says, no, none of these laws violate the Commerce Clause, they're entirely constitutional. Well, then you are going to, I think, start to see efforts coalesce at the national level um, for a recycling law that would wrap in all the states, one set of reports, one set of fees. Then you really could just go after the petrochemical companies and importers, and it would be it. It'd be over. It'd be simple. And then, pass the money out somehow, some formula, hopefully, one that is fair and makes sense to everybody and isn't just taking money from California and giving it to Alabama. Uh, that all this, of course, is complex and poses huge questions. And it's easy for me to outline in a single minute.
Sure.
As a CEO, I'm very good at that kind of thing.
Right.
The details are left for everybody else to figure
Right.
out.
Yeah. Here's the big picture. Y'all make it happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
So
Kevin,
I know my strengths and weaknesses.
so I appreciate the time today, Kevin. Anything we didn't cover today that you wanted to just kind of throw at me? Anything you want to plug where people can find out more about Emerald or anything?
Well, you can go to our website, which is www.empack.com. I will say we are, from what I know, the only company providing post-consumer recycled material food grade for a food package in most of your grocery stores. So little old Emerald packaging. And I will say, even with EPR, the one issue that I always come back to is we could have had sustainable packaging 30 years ago if the grocers had been willing to pay for it. The technology exists. PCR has existed a long time. Compostables have existed a long time. The grocers continue to be a problem, and to a problem to the extent that they're trying to turn around and charge their EPR fees back to their suppliers. So that farmer who's paying his own EPR fees is now getting a bill from Trader Joe's, their largest customer, saying, hey, you pay my fee. And so, you got to get all these folks together. I mean, the grocers are very slippery in Sacramento. They are very well represented and they know how to lobby, and they are not innocent in any of this by a long shot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because they've been unwilling to pay a red cent for anything for 30 years.
Mm.
Even collection bins outside their stores.
Yeah. I mean, I guess in that aspect, that EPR it feels like leading a bunch of horses to water, but none of them want to drink. They're just like, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
All right, Kevin.
Well, they're going to have to drink, and so they better get used to it.
Yeah, it starts somewhere, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's here to stay, no matter whether these bills, flounder for a bit or not, or whether you get lawsuits. It's here to stay. Let's figure out how to make it work.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate the time, the passionate conversation I loved having. So it was very fun to listen to. So thank you again, and have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Happy 4th.